Hello again, and welcome to a financial thought leadership podcast, Banking on Experience, sponsored by CRMNEXT, the banking CRM, where we simplify work, drive growth, and deliver on experience. This podcast is meant to empower individuals working in the financial industry with stories, experiences, and knowledge straight from the source. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and stay tuned for an awesome show. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Banking on Experience. I'm your host, James Gilbert. Today we are joined by Dan Marquez, an advocate, storyteller, disruptor in the credit union space, also the host of the Woke Ass People podcast.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Yes, I am Dan Marquez, pronouns they, them, and creative producer of Woke Ass People and Madam Nymphadora. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. You are such a fabulous host and producer of this podcast, and I'm just so excited for our conversation.
We are going to be talking about a topic that I believe, after talking to so many people in this industry, is still a very hot topic. But we're going to take it to a different level. Today, we're going to be talking about DEI, but we're going to be talking about breaking down and removing the fear with talking about it. So, first of all, why are you passionate about breaking down the fear of DEI?
I really think I started to develop and build a passion for the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion because there were so many lived experiences of my own. And I started in the credit union space pretty young. I was 20 years old, working at the credit union part-time, and every credit union has a very different demographic of members that they serve. And there were just moments and experiences that I would realize in helping some of the members that they weren't getting some of that equitable treatment from other staff members. And immediately, things were so different. Even as 9 years ago. This was almost a decade ago, and things were very, very different to where we're not calling people out and putting a big cancel culture flag on something. But I began to realize there's a gap here, and I think it's due to lack of information. It's just not happening. And I worked at the time on the teller line with some individuals that had very different views than my own. And it was also an election year. And so there were always different conversations. But what I always valued out of it is all of us would sit up there and we would share our different views and we'd go about our business. I mean, we didn't get really worked up about things. And really some of that launched my passion because I was tangibly having a conversation with people who had very different views than my own. Not that mine were changing by any means in that aspect, but it changed my perception about people who have different beliefs of your own. We were able to break down some stereotypes and unconscious biases, and just that kind of carried throughout the years. And it's not from that moment I was I want to study DEI, I want to get really involved in it. I was just being a human and being an ally to other communities that were different than my own and trying to understand. And I think that that's the biggest step in DEI work, right? Is learning what you don't know. But over the years, as DEI has become such a big buzzword, sometimes people began to call on Dan because Dan's queer and Dan does drag and Dan's a queer person of color. And so it was let's check some boxes. Let's get these people talking about these things. I think the biggest realization that I've had as being kind of a quote unquote spokesperson for some at least queer liberation is there's so many different perspectives, and we continue to aid in that problem. I think if we tokenize people to be the spokespeople for DEI because they're queer or Black and African American or Latino, we're putting people in more boxes. But my passion overall came from not necessarily shoving information down people's throats of this has to happen, we have to make change. Not to say that you're not going to see that spice out of me, but at the same time with Madam Nymphadora, it was let's take some educational approaches and let people know that I'm a drag queen. I'm just as harmless as anybody else, and we're going to bring some education to the table and the conversation to the table, because that's really what has to happen is that conversation.
I think one of the things that you mentioned that I want to double down on, and that's the idea of cancel culture. This is an area for me, having a lot of conversations with a lot of senior leaders in the business world that are so fearful to talk about it because of this cancel culture that exists today. I mean, we have to remember, to your point, 9 years ago, people were still afraid to use their voices for good, bad, and ugly, right? On social media. And I think in today's world, there's no fear. So when it comes to the fear side, how does cancel culture fit into that? And how do we make sure that we don't have in our frame of mind any type of cancel culture to begin with?
To me, I guess in the simplest form with cancel culture that I've dissected, just looking at society, is there's cancel culture and there's accountability. The conversations that we're having last summer after the murder of George Floyd, there were some of us emerging professionals who got together. We still maintain conversations to this day, but that's actually something we were talking about is here, YPs were this big thing, again, even a decade ago. And now you've got YPs who are getting to a different level and a different age group of themselves and maturing, if you will. But I began to look at the upcoming generation that so many folks are saying that's cancel culture, that generation really drives cancel culture. And I kind of look at this group of individuals, this millennial generation, if you will, not that quote says that we're not real, but I think it allows us to hold people a little more accountable. And I guess I feel like that's where some organizations should take a look in the mirror. I think oftentimes accountability can feel like cancel culture. It's not so much cancel culture, it's that accountability of look, we're not going to take this sort of treatment anymore from systemic racism that's out there, systemic homophobia that's out there, toxic masculinity. When there are movements of people saying, you need to do better as a community organization, I think when those leaders or those people are like, I'm being canceled, that's a totally personal issue that they need to look in the mirror maybe and be like, what am I not seeing? Because DEI work and being an ally is not being a white savior, not being a cisgender savior to step in and know all and be all. It's constant learning. And I guess that's kind of my spiel on it is it's a very fine line, I think. And for some people, it's a matter of interpretation. But I definitely think credit union members and employees saying there needs to be a drastic change in who we serve and how we do our business. That's not canceling the way things have been. That's progress. That's moving things forward. And that's exercising the democratic process, which credit unions are governed by. So just in the vein of credit unions, it's kind of like, how are you looking at this? And are you really taking the time to make the efforts to be better for your community?
I'm glad you gave some examples because you've been able to talk about this in a non-fearful way, right? You've been able to have dialogue and understand, both helping people understand your perspectives, but also helping understand other people's perspectives on this. How do you think that credit unions or people at a credit union can start developing, for lack of a better way of putting it, a group discussion where there is free-form thinking, right? Let's talk about everything that's on everyone's mind and let's come to an agreement on how we're going to approach this with everybody's feelings involved. How do you think people do that? Because you've done it pretty well.
Well, thank you. First of all, sometimes I'm like, God, am I doing enough? I need to do more. See, that's why I'm constantly going. A recommendation that I've made to some credit unions, one recently on the West Coast, was where when I met with this credit union, is their staff were already having a conversation. They were already talking about their core values and authenticity. And that's why I was there. It's like, let's talk about authenticity. But my suggestion is we have board of directors, we have supervisory committees, some have credit committees, but do you have a go forward committee with your community? Do you have an innovation committee with your community. And here we have so many credit unions that are almost struggling to tap into more volunteers into the credit union. Well, not everybody wants to bite off more than they can chew and go be on a board of directors and manage a financial institution with an executive team of leadership. But I would say that someone like myself, who doesn't work directly in a natural person credit union, I would really love if there was a credit union out there that was like, hey, we're creating a community development task force made up of our membership, made up of some of our employees, people who are not at the senior level, people who are your mid-level management, who have that hunger, who want to make a difference. That would be my biggest suggestion, is stop scratching your head of like, what should we do? How can we connect with people? We've all gone to so many trainings, webinars on how to build that relationship. You're there at the credit union because you've built the relationship with people. So just take an extra step and put more into action. Recognize that there's that issue and go, how can we do something cool to excite our members so they're not going to a financial institution that could potentially harm them?
It's almost like a little bit of a community play within the credit union, bringing in outside influences that can also bring new perspectives. One of the things that we talked about too are kind of 3 core emotions and things that we need to be doing when we're having these type of conversations. So I want to bring those up. First one was empathy. Second one was love. The third one was compassion. And some would say that all 3 of these intertwine with each other, but I would argue that they're very distinguishable differences between all 3 of them. And when we have these kind of conversations, I think it's so important that we establish the ground rules right out of the gates, right? And we say, look, everything we're about to talk about today, it's coming from compassion or passion for that matter on both sides, right? And as we receive that information, it's important that we receive it with love and understanding. And also be empathetic to the fact that we don't have all the details, because we may, believe it or not, have some unconscious bias of our own that exists. Yes. So double down on those 3 areas. How can we make those 3 core emotions part of culture within a credit union?
The short that I have of this is to be 100% inclusive. And if you can, go over that. And to elaborate on that, there was a community roundtable that I was a part of a couple years ago here in the community of Lincoln, Nebraska, where I'm at. And it was a bunch of different folks from all over, and it was called The Circle. And it was really just to talk about how to have inclusive meetings. And that's something that, you know, those 3, empathy, love, and compassion that you just highlighted there, make me think of is, one of the very first things we talked about was when you're organizing your meeting, when you're organizing a conversation strategy, identify if everybody who should be at the table is at the table. And if they're not, then you stop what you're doing and you do not have a conversation until everybody is present. I bring that up because to me, that is an act of empathy, of taking yourself out of your own lived experience and going, you know what, I don't have other people's shoes on right now, but there are other people out there walking who need to be here right now, who are not here right now. So how can we take those steps to get them? And if they're not in your organization, again, to your community partnerships, there needs to be representation there, and there's value to that. I think then what can come after that and during is hearing those stories. I think compassion would probably be number 2 after you get everybody at that table. You're having that inclusive conversation, hearing everybody's journey and having compassion for that and getting a way stronger understanding of what are these people going through. And I think the best example that I've had with that, having conversations with some mavericks in the space, is having some CEOs or executives take some learning opportunities from their tellers. These folks are frontline. They literally live and feel.
Great.
The pandemic is what really brought me to think about a lot of these things, as I was seeing a lot of videos or posts of executives that you see a lot in the media, in the credit union space at home. And I just got to thinking, wow, the tellers and member service reps that are working in the branches because they have to are folks that are are severely underpaid and risked themselves to make sure that their members' needs were met. And I'm not saying that there's levels above that aren't doing their part and doing what needs to be done, but
they have
there's
way
a
more
gap.
skin in the game.
Yes, they do. Yes.
That's just how that's how it is. Like, the higher up you get in an organization, the more risk you take on personally, which is why you usually get paid more, right?
Mhm.
So when you think about it, like, you're taking that responsibility on the higher up you go. Well, a teller, they're there just to make sure that it's efficient and members are served, and like, what's in it for them? My paycheck? That's not enough.
No, absolutely not. And I think that that's where, to me, a couple months ago, I thought to myself, this would be the opportune time. We're back into a more remote area again with the cases of COVID creeping up. But a few months ago, when things were looking bright, I was like, gosh, this would be the perfect time for executives to march right on down to that front line and tell me, what have your members been telling you the last year? What do we need to do differently?
I don't know why more leaders don't go to those that are several levels below them and talk to them about the day-to-day stuff. I honestly don't know why it doesn't happen. And I think that one of the things that I've ran into with other leaders, even myself at times, right, is you oftentimes get in this frame of mind that, well, we've got way more experience, so we've been there, done that. We've been in their role, right? And it's just it's such a fallacy, I think, that exists in the business world today, because I learn more from getting in the weeds with my team than I do at any other level. That matter. I learn more in those moments than anything. If you're a CEO, go talk to the tellers. Spend time with them. Like, don't just go, oh, I'm gonna set up like these 10-minute meetings with each teller and I'm gonna get to know the business a little bit better. Like, spend an hour with them, like you would your executive team. That will mean more to them than anything. That's stuff you can do today. You don't have to wait. Like, it takes very little effort. You just make the decision. Hey, I want to set up a one-on-one with all tellers over the next month. Let's get an hour for each one of them. Boom. Make it happen. Like, that's such an easy thing, and it requires very little effort, almost no lift on your end.
And you know what it does? It achieves what we brought into that conversation. Gaining more empathy, or exercising empathy, having a better compassion for it. And when you spend that time, it's going to build such a strong trust and respect with those people that are doing that job, that at least my objective, if I were that leader, is I would want them to love their job after that. I would appreciate that, of like, wow, this person really spent time with me. And I say that from an experience of when I was a branch manager. I would work the teller line some days just because I wanted to. I loved interacting with the members. And I would have a lot of my staff tell me, we were a small staff, they would say, like, I love that you just come out and hang out here and like do transactions with us. And you know who else loved it? The members. And members would say, you are not somebody who's sitting in your office just letting things be busy and not, you're active, you're visible. And to me, that's how a manager of a credit union, whatever level you're at, you should be doing that.
Well, and it's so interesting too, because so many credit unions have, pillars of their culture that are supposed to be about this, but no action is taken. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about too, there's a giant DEI movement that's happening in the credit union world. What has been your experience from your perspective in seeing that and seeing some of the, even if it's small progress, at least progress being made in this industry?
There has been a lot over the last year, really seeing the industry throw and put so much intentional support behind the African American Credit Union Coalition. And not only the support, but seeing Renee Sadie-White just step forward and say, this is changing. We are 100% doing something with our emerging leaders, all of the leaders in the space that deserve to be recognized and have the same equitable opportunities ever. You being a co-founder of CU Pride, it's been fabulous to see the industry support. Just had a call yesterday with some folks with CU Pride and PSC Unity, and it was just amazing to me, like fulfilling to walk away and go, when I started in this movement a decade ago, nobody was talking about being who they are and being their authentic selves. So I think as much as I'm glad you said like the small wins. We say that a lot in the work that I do. It's like there's so much going on that like celebrating those small wins are really vital in them. So I think seeing the advancement of so many chapters of the AACUC, of the Global Women's Leadership Network, the work that the CU DEI Collective with Victor Coro and Allison Carr and company, it's truly amazing. It's phenomenal. And I would 100% be remiss if I didn't say that the work that Denise Wymore, myself, and some other credit union pioneers, Sam Brownell and Ari Farrell, we're working towards develop new credit unions. And the synchronicity has just lined up so well because we have seen a really well establishment of CU DEI collective and industry engagement of an active commitment. And when the conversations were coming of new credit unions, it was really starting to hit a pivotal moment of, we need to take action. The credit union space needs to take action to serve the underserved. And yes, there's legislation. Yes, there's policy. Yes, there's grassroots advocacy. But if we are truly a credit union movement, we have to keep moving. And we looked at this as a really great way to bring about more inclusion efforts within the credit union space and tackle the need for financial cooperatives in underserved communities and historically invisible communities to do so. So I think seeing this cooperative of people working together to say there needs to be action that is taken to establish representation and a brand of how credit unions are vastly different than any other financial institution. And the thing that I'll say that I'm fearful of in that vein is if we don't take more intentional, actionable steps to do so, we will move behind. And I say that because there are so many big banks out there that are really looking to advance their DEI efforts. They're not stupid. They're in fact very intelligent with their branding and their marketing within their communities. And yes, credit unions don't have the huge marketing dollars to do so, but we are not a movement that was founded on that. We're a movement founded on grassroots organization and raising our voices. And it's not like it happened 100 years ago. I mean, this stuff was happening in the 80s and in the 90s with field of membership expansion and getting share drops. But my point being is we are making very large strides as far as bringing the conversation to the table in a very conservative industry, in a very white male dominant industry. But we're not going to make our moves of advancement in the right way if we continue to hire and promote executives that are white males. We're not going to continue to progress as a movement if we only consider the members that are the average member age of late 40s. We're not going to achieve those things if we are not taking intentional steps to actually make a change and participate in social movements. We are a pendulum of society and of business. It is totally a socioeconomic cooperative. And if we totally ignore what's happening in our society, we're already losing. So I think taking those steps of recognizing that there's communities to serve, and looking in that mirror, that step of accountability and going, we're obviously not serving them. So what do we need to do better? And maybe create a community development committee. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting because it reminds me a little bit of some of the folks that I've had on the podcast previously. we all know, if you're in the credit union industry or you serve the credit union industry in any way, shape, or form, you know about the big grants that are going on through the government. Well, guess what, guys? It's all about trying to do something and act through technology or other means. That's what these grants are for. That's what they're for. So like right now is the wave to ride and get on it, right? Don't fall behind. Don't wait for the wave to drop. Get on it right now, because DEI is something the banks are taking to the bank with them, right? They're going full fledged, putting a lot of dollars into that stuff. So I want to end the podcast by asking you one last question. The differences are what make the world an incredible place. We know that. You and I know that.
Yeah.
For the listeners out there, how can they, or anyone for that matter, embrace differences without it being a conflict? Let's go back to the emotions.
Yeah.
Start with love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have empathy and be compassionate as you're listening.
What this really brings me to think of here is really, again, what I was talking about at the beginning of having different perspectives and conversations. Is when I first started in the teller space, I would have members that would say, no, I don't want you to wait on me. You are a boy and boys aren't tellers and I don't trust it. Literally have heard those things for a long time. But I never got like offended by it, because I looked at things like, you know what? Everybody's different. That person prefers somebody that they know, has nothing to do with how I outwardly present, has nothing to do with the fact that anyone's anatomy, nothing. That person just is comfortable with these other folks because they don't know me. And what was great is there would be moments where I would be the only teller available and they'd have to come to me. And over time, we would have differences. Members would talk politics. I didn't talk politics. I would know we would have different views. But it didn't change the fact that I ever stopped thinking that that person is still a person and has somebody that loves them and they love people and they're important in a world to somebody. And it put a perspective of like, that person is also important in your world because of this cooperative you're a part of. So I think I'm glad you brought up love and empathy and compassion. I think if we try that a little bit more when we're conversating with people and meeting people and learning their story, is taking a step back a little bit and breaking down some of our internal barriers that we have.
One of the things that I guess you could call it like a life motto for me has always been, try to have every interaction as a human being and realize that the other person you're having an interaction with is a human being. Realize that if they're angry, there's probably a reason behind it. It doesn't mean that you should get angry back, right? Sometimes we have to realize that we ourselves are human. We can make those mistakes, but it's how we work through the mistake that really matters. For me, when it boils down to having differences, no matter what they are, if you make a mistake, own it. And if you own it, apologize.
Yes, I'm with you. I just have to say that reminds me of like almost every time. Sometimes I can be, at least I think so. And I've had people be like, no, you're not a Karen. But there are times that like things get frustrating. You know, you're talking to a pharmacy, you're talking to whomever. So like you said, own it, apologize, and you're just going to feel better about it.
Totally agree. Well, we are at time. Dan, where can people reach you? What if they want you to be a part of the community development? Like, how do they do that?
How do they do that? Well, little spoiler alert, Madam Nymphadora.com. She is working on a little pilot program actually to do just that with some credit unions that are looking to, might not have the staffing or, that step yet of like, hey, how do we do this with that? So Madam Nymphadora is working on a little pilot program for some credit unions. So at her website, madamnymphadora.com, there's some information out there that people can reach out to. Email is disrupt@madamnymphadora.com. We'll be here for you on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok.
You name it. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we appreciate it. And I would love to have you back again to talk more about this. So if you're a listener, please subscribe. If you want to hear episodes like this or topics that are different than this or anything like that, you can reach out to me via LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to make that happen.